Section 1. Theory of Gemeinschaft. 1. Embryo or emergent forms. In accordance with the preliminary explanations, the theory of Gemeinschaft starts from the assumption of perfect unity of human wills as an original or natural condition which is preserved in spite of actual separation. This natural condition is found in manifold forms because of dependence on the nature of the relationship between individuals who are differently conditioned. The common root of this natural condition is the coherence of vegetative life through birth and the fact that the human wills, insofar as each one of these wills is related to a definite physical body, are and remain linked to each other by parental descent and by sex, or by necessity become so linked. This close interrelation as a direct and mutual affirmation is represented in its most intense form by three types of relationships, namely 1. The relation between a mother and her child. 2. The relation between husband and wife in its natural or general biological meaning. 3. The relation among brothers and sisters, that is, at least among those who know each other as being the offspring of the same mother. If, in the relations of kindred individuals, one may assume the embryo of Gemeinschaft or the tendency and force thereto rooted in the individual wills, specific significance must be attributed to the three above-mentioned relationships, which are the strongest and most capable of development. Each, however, is important in a special way. A. The relation between mother and child is most deeply rooted in liking or in pure instinct. Also, in this case, the transition from an existing physical to a purely psychic bond is evident. But the younger the child, the more apparent is the physical element. The relationship implies long duration, as the mother has to feed, protect, and educate the child until it becomes capable of doing this alone. With this development, the relation loses in essentiality, and separation of mother and child becomes more probable. This tendency toward separation, however, can be counterbalanced, or at least restrained, by other tendencies, namely, through the mother and child becoming accustomed to one another and through remembrance of the pleasures which they have given each other, especially the gratitude of the child for the care and painstaking attention of the mother. To these direct mutual relations, other common and indirectly binding relations involving other things are added: pleasure, habit, remembrance of objects in the environments which were or have become pleasant. The same holds also for shared remembrances of intimate, helpful, beloved persons such as the father, if he lives with the mother, or the brothers and sisters of the mother or child, etc. B. Sexual relationship does not in any way necessitate a permanent living together. Moreover, in the beginning, it does not lead so much to a fixed mutual relationship as to one-sided subjugation of the woman, who, weaker by nature, can be reduced to an object of mere possession or to servitude. For this reason, the relationship between man and wife, if considered independent from kinship and from all social forces based thereupon, has to be supported mainly by habituation to one another, in order that the relationship may shape itself into one of mutual affirmation. Besides this, there are, as will be readily understood, the other previously mentioned factors which assist in strengthening the bond: the children as common possession, and further, the common possessions and household. C. Among brothers and sisters, there is no such innate and instinctive affection and natural liking or preference as between mother and children, or between husband and wife. This is true even though the husband-wife relationship may resemble that among brothers and sisters, and there are many reasons to believe that this has frequently been the case with some tribes in an earlier period in the history of man. It must be remembered, however, that among such tribes, as long as descent was reckoned only from the mother, the relationship between brothers and sisters was extended in name as well as in its emotional aspects to the corresponding generations of cousins. This practice was so general that the more limited meaning of the concept was developed only in a later period. It was through a similar development in the most important ethnic groups that marriage between brothers and sisters came to be regarded as illicit, and where exogamy prevailed, marriage and clan membership, but not kinship, also became mutually exclusive. Therefore, one is justified in considering love between brother and sister, although essentially based upon blood kinship, as the most human relationship between human beings. The intellectual quality of this relationship, as compared to the two others discussed above, is also apparent from the fact that, while instinct plays only a small part, the intellectual force of memory is the foremost in creating, conserving, and consolidating this bond of hearts. For where children of the same mother, in living with her, are also living together with each other, the reminiscences of each of them about pleasant impressions and experiences will necessarily include the persons and activities of their brothers or sisters. This all the more so, the more closely the group is united, especially where, endangered from the outside, it is compelled to strive and act as a group. Thus, habit makes such life easier and dearer. At the same time, the greatest possible similarity of nature and equality of strength may be expected among brothers, even though differences in intelligence and experience as a purely human or mental element may easily be perceived. 2. Their unity. Many other less intimate relationships are linked to these most fundamental and familiar types. They find their unity and perfection in the relationships between father and children. The existence of an organic basis which keeps the intelligent father connected with the offspring of his body makes this relationship similar to the mother-child relationship in the most important aspect. It differs in that the instinctive part of it is so much weaker. Thus, it resembles more closely the husband-wife relationship and is, therefore, more readily conceived as merely coercive. But while the affection of the father as to duration more than as to intensity is inferior to that of the mother, the love of a father differs from the love of a mother in the opposite direction. If present to any considerable degree, therefore, it is similar through its spiritual nature to the affection between brothers and sisters, but in contrast to the latter, it is defined by an inequality of nature, especially that of age and intellectual power. Thus, the idea of authority is, within the Gemeinschaft, most adequately represented by fatherhood, or paternity. However, authority in this sense does not imply possession and use in the interest of the master. It means education and instruction as the fulfillment of procreation, i.e., sharing the fullness of one's own life and experiences with the children, who will gradually grow to reciprocate these gifts and thus to establish a truly mutual relationship. In this regard, the firstborn son has a natural preference. He is the closest to the father and will occupy the place which the aging father leaves. The full authority of the father is, therefore, at least implicitly passed on to the firstborn son at his very birth. Thus, the idea of an ever-renewed vital force finds its expression in the continuous succession of fathers and sons. We know that this rule of inheritance is not the original one. Apparently, the patriarchate has been preceded by the matriarchate and the rule of the brother on the mother's side, and even if collateral succession, the system of tanistry, has precedence over primogeniture, this is based only on the relation to a former generation. The succeeding brother does not derive his right from the brother, but from the common father. 3. Enjoyment and labor. Wherever people live together, there is, or develops, according to general conditions, some difference and division of enjoyment and labor, which produces a reciprocal relation between them. This is most directly evident in mother-child relationships. Here the enjoyment surpasses work in importance. The child enjoys protection, nutriment, and instruction. The mother enjoys possession, later on obedience, and finally intelligent assistance. To a certain degree, a similar mutuality exists also between husband and wife, a mutuality which is based, however, in the first place upon sexual difference, and only secondly upon difference in age. Relevant to the sex difference, the difference in natural strength becomes evident in the division of labor. In defending their common property, the task of the woman is the protection of valued possessions. The man has to keep off the enemy. To obtain and provide the necessities of life is the field of the man. To conserve and prepare them as far as food is concerned, that of the woman. And when other work and the instruction of children is needed, we find that the masculine energy is directed toward the outside, fighting and leading the sons. The woman, on the other hand, remains confined to the inner circle of home life and is attached to the female children. Real helpfulness, mutual aid, and advancement exist in the purest form among brothers and sisters because they tend toward the same common activities. Besides difference in sex, difference in mental capacity necessarily becomes apparent in the brother-sister relationship. Accordingly, one side will be more concerned with brain work, thinking and planning, while the other side is given the manual labor, the task of execution. But such division of labor may also be regarded as a relation between guidance and leadership, on the one hand, and compliance and obedience on the other. It must be recognized that all these differentiations follow a pattern of nature. However, often these inherent regular tendencies, like all others, may be interrupted, counterbalanced, or reversed. 4. Dominance and balance. In each of these relationships, individual wills mutually direct and serve each other so that the relationship may be presented as an equilibrium of forces. If, however, this is true, everything that gives dominance to one will has to be counterbalanced by a stronger influence from the opposite direction. The ideal equilibrium would be attained if greater enjoyment derived from the relationship corresponded to harder work for it, i.e., work which requires greater effort or rarer abilities. Vice versa, easier work would be balanced by lesser enjoyment, for even though toil and struggle be in themselves pleasure, the exertion of forces necessitates subsequent relaxation. Energy spent must be restored. Motion must be followed by rest. The greater satisfaction of the stronger individuals is partly the feeling of superiority itself, of power and command, whereas, on the contrary, being led and protected and having to obey, the feeling of inferiority, is always felt with some displeasure as a kind of pressure and constraint, even though it may be alleviated by affection, habit, and gratitude. The relation of forces among the individual wills is made still clearer by the following reasoning. All superiority carries with it the danger of haughtiness and cruelty, and therefore of a hostile, coercive treatment if, accompanying increasing superiority, the tendency to benefit those dominated is not greater or does not also increase. And this happens to be a natural, inherent tendency. Greater force and power entail also greater ability to aid. If such an intention or will is at all existent, it will be all the stronger and more decided because of the feeling of power, which in itself is will. Thus, we find, especially in the realm of these physical organic relationships, an instinctive and naive tenderness of the strong for the weak, a desire to aid and to protect, which is closely connected with the pleasure of possession and the enjoyment of one's own power. 5. 3 types of authority. A superior power which is exercised to the benefit of the subordinate and which, because in accordance with his will, is accepted by him, I call dignity or authority. We distinguish 3 kinds: authority of age, authority of force, and authority of wisdom or spirit. These 3 are united in the authority of the father who is engaged in protecting, assisting, and guiding his family. The danger inherent in such power causes fear in the weaker ones, and this by itself would mean nothing but negation and repudiation, except insofar as mingled with admiration. Beneficence and goodwill, however, bring forth the will to honor, and the sentiment of reverence is born in a situation where will to honor predominates. Thus, as a result of this difference in power, tenderness corresponds to reverence, or, in a lesser degree of intensity, benevolence to respect. They represent the 2 poles of sentiment on which Gemeinschaft is based, in case there exists a definite difference of power. The existence of such motives makes possible and probable a kind of Gemeinschaft even between master and servant. And this is the rule, especially if it is supported and fostered, as in the case of kinship, by an intimate, lasting, and secluded common life in the home. 6. Gemeinschaft by blood, of place, of mind, kinship, neighborhood, friendship. The Gemeinschaft by blood, denoting unity of being, is developed and differentiated into Gemeinschaft of locality, which is based on a common habitat. A further differentiation leads to the Gemeinschaft of mind, which implies only cooperation and coordinated action for a common goal. Gemeinschaft of locality may be conceived as a community of physical life, just as Gemeinschaft of mind expresses the community of mental life. In conjunction with the others, this last type of Gemeinschaft represents the truly human and supreme form of community. Kinship Gemeinschaft signifies a common relation to and share in human beings themselves, while in Gemeinschaft of locality, such a common relation is established through collective ownership of land. And in Gemeinschaft of mind, the common bond is represented by sacred places and worshipped deities. All three types of Gemeinschaft are closely interrelated in space as well as in time. They are, therefore, also related in all such single phenomena and in their development, as well as in general human culture and its history. Wherever human beings are related through their wills in an organic manner and affirm each other, we find one or another of the three types of Gemeinschaft. Either the earlier type involves the later one, or the later type has developed to relative independence from some earlier one. It is therefore possible to deal with 1. Kinship, 2. Neighborhood, and 3. Friendship as definite and meaningful derivations of these original categories. The house constitutes the realm and, as it were, the body of kinship. Here people live together under one protecting roof. Here they share their possessions and their pleasures. They feed from the same supply. They sit at the same table. The dead are venerated here as invisible spirits, as if they were still powerful and held a protecting hand over their family. Thus, common fear and common honor ensure peaceful living and cooperation with greater certainty. The will and spirit of kinship is not confined within the walls of the house, nor bound up with physical proximity. But where it is strong and alive in the closest and most intimate relationship, it can live on itself, thrive on memory alone, and overcome any distance by its feeling and its imagination of nearness and common activity. Nevertheless, it seeks all the more for physical proximity and is loath to give it up, because such nearness alone will fulfill the desire for love. The ordinary human being, therefore, in the long run and for the average of cases, feels best and most cheerful if he is surrounded by his family and relatives. He is among his own, chez soi. Neighborhood describes the general character of living together in the rural village. The proximity of dwellings, the communal fields, and even the mere contiguity of holdings necessitate many contacts of human beings and cause inurement to and intimate knowledge of one another. They also necessitate cooperation in labor, order, and management, and lead to common supplication for grace and mercy to the gods and spirits of land and water who bring blessing or menace with disaster. Although essentially based upon proximity of habitation, the neighborhood type of Gemeinschaft can nevertheless persist during separation from the locality, but it then needs to be supported still more than ever by well-defined habits of reunion and sacred customs. Friendship is independent of kinship and neighborhood, being conditioned by and resulting from similarity of work and intellectual attitude. It comes most easily into existence when crafts or callings are the same or of similar nature. Such a tie, however, must be made and maintained through easy and frequent meetings, which are most likely to take place in a town. A worshipped deity, created out of common mentality, has an immediate significance for the preservation of such a bond, since only, or at least mainly, this deity is able to give it living and lasting form. Such good spirit, therefore, is not bound to any place, but lives in the conscience of its worshippers, and accompanies them on their travels to foreign countries. Thus, those who are brethren of such a common faith feel like members of the same craft or rank, everywhere united by a spiritual bond and the cooperation in a common task. Urban community of life may be classified as neighborhood, as is also the case with a community of domestic life in which non-related members or servants participate. In contradistinction, spiritual friendship forms a kind of invisible scene or meeting which has to be kept alive by artistic intuition and creative will. The relations between human beings themselves as friends and comrades have the least organic and intrinsically necessary character. They are the least instinctive and are based less upon habit than are the relationships of neighborhood. They are of a mental nature and seem to be founded, therefore, as compared with the earlier relationships, upon chance or free choice. But a similar differentiation has been pointed out already for the relations of pure kinship and leads to the following statements. 7. Judicial, feudal, sacerdotal functions. The neighborhood may be compared with the kinship type in the same way as the husband-wife relationship. Therefore, affinity in general may be compared with the mother-child relationship. What is achieved only by mutual liking in the mother-child relationship must be made up for by habit in the neighborhood type. As the relation among brothers and sisters, therefore also all cousins and other relations of similar consanguinity are comparable to the other organically conditioned relationships. So in the same manner, friendship is comparable to neighborhood and kinship. Memory creates gratitude and faithfulness. The specific truth of such relationships must manifest itself in mutual trust and belief. As the foundations of these relationships are no longer spontaneous and so self-evident, and as the individuals know and determine their own will and ability more definitely, these relationships are the most difficult to preserve and the most susceptible to disturbances, such as disputes and quarrels, which will happen in almost all group life. Not only does constant proximity and frequency of contacts mean mutual furtherance and affirmation, but inhibition and negation also become real possibilities or probabilities of a certain degree. Only as long as mutual furtherance and affirmation predominate can a relation really be considered Gemeinschaft. Thus, it is explained that in conformity with many experiences, such purely mental or psychological brotherhoods can stand only to a certain limit, the frequency and narrowness of physical proximity of real joint life. They have to find their counterpoise in a high degree of individual freedom. Within kinship, all natural authority is concentrated in paternal authority. Where the social grouping is based on neighborhood, this paternal authority is transformed into the authority of the prince, and as such retains its importance. Under this form, it is based more upon power than upon age and fatherhood. It is most clearly evident in the influence of the master over his people, of the landlord over his copyholders, of the feudal lord over his serfs. When friendship is based on common devotion to the same calling or the same craft, such dignity and authority expresses itself as the authority of the master toward his disciples, pupils, apprentices. Judicial functions and the element of justice befit the authority of age, for youthful irascibility and passions of all kinds give rise to violence, revenge, and dispute. The aged man is a speculator above such frailties and less disposed to help one against another because of predilection or hatred. He will try to discover by which side the evil was started and whether there existed sufficient provocation for a normal, moderate person. He will also decide through what action or suffering the excessive deed is to be compensated. The authority of power must shine forth in battle. It must be proven by courage and bravery. Therefore, it attains its consummation in the feudal authority. To the Lord falls the task of rallying the fighting forces, leading the march against the enemy, directing all energies toward the attainment of the goal and the warding off of evil forces. The enlightened is endowed with the gift to divine and surmise, in most decisions and measures, more of what is right and wholesome than anyone else is able to see with certainty. As the future is hidden and often stands menacing and terrible before us, among all human arts, preeminence seems to be accorded to that which enables one to know, to interpret, and to impel the will of the invisible. Thus, the authority of wisdom surpasses all others, as sacerdotal authority, in which form God himself seems to dwell in person among the living, and in which the immortal and eternal force is believed to reveal and communicate itself to those surrounded by dangers and mortal fear. These various directing and leading activities and virtues require and complement each other. The above-mentioned kinds of authority can essentially be conceived of as connected with every superior position as far as such is derived from the unity of a Gemeinschaft. Thus, the judicial authority is consistent through its origin with the position of the family father, while the authority of the duke or knight or feudal lord corresponds to the rank of the patriarch. And finally, the sacerdotal authority befits best the rank of the master. Feudal authority, however, is also due quite naturally to the paterfamilias, especially when unity against enemies requires submission. That applies to the leader of a clan, as the head of the oldest among a group of related families, and, in the most forceful way, to the chief of an unorganized tribe who takes the place of the mythical common ancestor. And this feudal authority again is raised to the divine sacerdotal authority. For the ancestors are, or will become, deities. The deities, on the other hand, are believed to be ancestors and fatherly friends. Thus we find deities of the home, of the family, of the tribe, and of the folk community, Volksgemeinde. In them, the force of such a Gemeinschaft exists in the most eminent way. They are capable of bringing about the impossible. Their workings are supernatural. Therefore, they will help if nourished and worshipped with piety and humility. They do harm and punish if forgotten or despised. They themselves are, as fathers and judges, lords and leaders, taskmasters and teachers, the original possessors and examples of these human dignities. The feudal authority requires the holder to be a judge, for a common fight against the enemy requires undisputed decisions in settling internal quarrels. The sacerdotal office is qualified to consecrate such decisions as sacred and inviolable. The gods themselves are honored as creators of law and judicial wisdom. 8. Authority and service, inequality and its limits. All authority or office is characterized by particular and enhanced freedom and honor, and thus represents a specific sphere of will. As such, it must be derived from the general and equal sphere of will of the Gemeinschaft. It finds its corollary in service as a particular and diminished freedom and honor. Each office or authority can be regarded as service and each service as office or authority, provided the particularity involved is taken into consideration. The realm of will, and therefore the will of the Gemeinschaft, is a mass of determined force, power, or right. And right is, in essence, will to initiate action, to allow action to be initiated, to obey and accept responsibility. This is the nature of all derived realms of will, in which rights and duties are the two corresponding aspects of the same thing, or nothing but the subjective modalities of the same objective substance of right or force. In this way, through increased and diminished duties and rights, real inequalities exist and develop within the Gemeinschaft through its will. These inequalities can be increased only to a certain limit, however, because beyond this limit, the essence of the Gemeinschaft as the unity of unequal beings would be dissolved. In case the superior's legal power would become too great, their relation to the common sphere of right would become indifferent and without value, and the inferior's legal power would become too small, and their relationship thereto unreal and insignificant. The less human beings who remain or come into contact with each other are bound together in relation to the same Gemeinschaft, the more they stand opposite each other as free agents of their wills and abilities. The less this freedom is dependent upon a preconditioned will of the individual himself, which is to say, the less this will is dependent upon or influenced by a common will, the greater is the freedom. For besides the inherited forces and instincts, the influence of a community as an educating and guiding will is the most important factor determining the condition and formation of every individual habit and disposition. Especially is the family spirit, Familiengeist, important, but so also is every spirit, Geist, which is similar to it and has the same effects. 9. Common will, understanding, natural law, language, mother tongue, concord. Reciprocal binding sentiment as a peculiar will of a Gemeinschaft we shall call understanding, consensus. It represents the special social force and sympathy which keeps human beings together as members of a totality. As everything instinctive in man is related to reasons and requires the capacity of speech, this mentality can be regarded also as the reason and significance of such a relationship. This mentality exists, for instance, between the parent and the child only to the degree in which the child is conceived as possessing speech, intellect, and reason. In the same way, it can be said that everything that conforms to the conception of a Gemeinschaft relationship and what in and for this situation has meaning forms its laws. Everything that conforms to the conception of this Gemeinschaft relationship is to be considered as the proper and real will of those bound together. Insofar as enjoyment and labor are differentiated according to the very nature and capacity of individuals, especially in such a manner that one part is entitled to guidance, the other bound to obedience, this constitutes a natural law, or an order of group life, which assigns a sphere and function incorporating duties and privileges to every will. Understanding is based upon intimate knowledge of each other, insofar as this is conditioned and advanced by direct interest of one being in the life of the other, and readiness to take part in his joy and sorrow. For that reason, the more the constitution and experience or natural disposition, character, and intellectual attitude are similar or harmonize, the more probable is understanding. The real organ of understanding through which it develops and improves is language. Language, by means of gestures and sounds, enables expressions of pain and pleasure, fear and desire, and all other feelings and emotions to be imparted and understood. Language has, as we all know, not been invented and, as it were, agreed upon as a means and tool by which one makes oneself understood. It is itself the living understanding, both in its content and in its form. Similar to all other conscious activities of expression, the manifestation of language is the involuntary outcome of deep feelings and prevailing thoughts. It is not merely an artificial means of overcoming a natural lack of understanding, nor does it serve merely the purpose of enabling one to make oneself understood. Language can be used, however, among those who do understand each other as a mere system of symbols, the same as other symbols which have been agreed upon. All these manifestations can be expressions of hostile as well as friendly passions. This justifies the general statement that friendly and hostile moods and passions underlie the same or very similar conditions. We must, however, distinguish between the hostility which springs from the rupture or loosening of natural and existing ties, and the other type of hostility which is based upon strangeness, misunderstanding, and distrust. Both are instinctive, but the first one is anger, hatred, displeasure. The second one is fear, abhorrence, dislike. The first one is acute. The second one, chronic. Of course, language, like any other means of communication between minds, did not spring from either of these two kinds of hostility, which is only an unnatural and diseased state, but from intimacy, fondness, and affection. Especially from the deep understanding between mother and child, language should develop most easily and vigorously. Underlying the open hostility associated with an intimate understanding, on the contrary, we can always think of a certain friendship and unity. The real foundation of unity, and consequently the possibility of Gemeinschaft, in the first place is closeness of blood relationship and mixture of blood. Secondly, physical proximity. And finally, for human beings, intellectual proximity. In this gradation, therefore, are to be found the sources of all kinds of understanding. We may now establish the great main laws of Gemeinschaft. 1. Relatives and married couples love each other or easily adapt themselves to each other. They speak together and think along similar lines. Likewise do neighbors and other friends. 2. There is understanding between people who love each other. 3. Those who love and understand each other remain and dwell together and organize their common life. A mixed or complex form of common determinative will, which has become as natural as language itself, and which consists of a multitude of feelings of understanding which are measured by its norm, we call concord, Eintracht, or family spirit, concordia, as a cordial allegiance and unity. Understanding and concord are one and the same thing, namely, will of the Gemeinschaft in its most elementary forms, including understanding in their separate relations and actions, and concord in their total force and nature.